Hi everyone, so my name is Connor and this is my HDFS final reflection video. Um, so when I started to sit down and do this video, I was thinking that I didn't really feel like we had talked very much about families in this class and like families and identity development. However, after going back and rereading some of my notes from the first part of the semester, I do feel a little bit differently. I feel like most of what we learned about families and identity development came a lot more from the panels than it did from the course discussions. However, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the readings from the first part of the semester. But before I started, I wanted to just tell everyone a little bit about my racial background. So I'm part Native American and I'm part white. Obviously, I look white. I could pass for white. Most people just assume that I'm white. Um, but the reason I bring this up is that during the first part of the semester, I wasn't really sure whether I should identify as being white or being non-white. I look white, right? So I was raised in a non-white family, though. But I guess throughout this course, I decided that I would define myself as white for the rest of the class just because I haven't really experienced discrimination in the same way that other people have. Um, but during the multiracial panel, I actually identified a lot more with what the panel was talking about when it comes to racial identity, um, especially with the statement, well, what are you? Which is something I actually got asked a lot when I was a little kid. And especially during the summer when my skin would get really dark. But I bring this up just to demonstrate how this class has actually made me think more about my racial identity, even though I'm not necessarily thinking differently about it. But before this video gets too long, I want to talk a little bit about Helms and then also a little bit about white fragility. So Helms defines that says that there's three different types of racism. That's institutional, individual, and cultural. So individual racism, I feel, is something that we can all understand, right? Their personal beliefs and values. Institutionals is laws and policies, which, if this were Braun from Brenner, it would be described as like your exosystem. One thing in relation to this that I wish we had talked a little bit more about in this class was talking about the difference between institutional racism and low socioeconomic status, just because I feel like it's something that people tend to get stuck on, and I don't really have a good way of explaining it, other than, as Osimodia James said, is that it happens independently of socioeconomic status. But I've noticed that with talking with people that that's not really a good enough definition for most people. Um, Anyways, the final type of racism that Helms describes is cultural racism, which she identifies as a societal belief in customs that promote the assumption that white culture is superior. I feel like this type of racism influences family and identity development a bit more than the others. Not that the others aren't relevant and important, just this is something that I felt like got brought up during our panel discussions a little bit more than the other two. So one of the ways that this was brought up was, I feel like the statement being whitewashed or acting white actually got brought up in a lot of our guest panel when we were talking about families and identity development. And a lot of people said that their families had said, like, oh, well, you're being whitewashed, especially in relation to money and education. But I feel like this is important because it's one of the ways that families can have a negative influence on your identity development, but it also just perpetuates that racial divide in the color line and also continues to reinforce almost the idea that white culture is superior. But the final thing I wanted to discuss really fast was white fragility, which D'Angelo describes as a state in which even a minimum amount of racial stress becomes intolerable, triggering a range of defensive moves, including outward displays of emotions such as fear, anger, or behavior such as argumentation, silence, or just leaving the such stressful situation. The reason I bring this up is that I wanted to address my white fragility a little bit in this situation. I noticed a lot that during this class that I would just not speak up. Sort of generally opposed to confrontation in general. But I noticed that I definitely didn't speak up in a lot of situations where I felt like were stressful or like racial tension. And not that this is a really good solution to problems, but I think just being more aware of it is really important and is sort of my personal solution to moving away from my own white fragility. That's all I have to say, so thank you for those of you who have paid attention this far.